Hey everybody, welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm Michael Noland. Can you believe it? It has been 60 years since the Beatles landed in America. That was good news for America at the time, folks. You see, late in the previous year, we lost John F. Kennedy, our president, to assassination. Early in 1964, 4 mop tops landed in New York City, and guess what? They took the country by storm. So, culturally speaking, this was a major event, no doubt. Some have called them the original boy band, a moniker I do not like at all, but they were as cute as any boy band, only this time we got a group of singers who could actually play their instruments. Now, that's not to say there weren't bands in America that weren't playing their own instruments. There were, of course. The Beach Boys played their own instruments. But you know what? With the Beatles, we seem to have gotten musicians that were a bit higher in caliber compared to a band like the Beach Boys. Now, that doesn't cut the Beach Boys down. What they did was phenomenal. Now, with the Beatles, you gotta understand, they were so intent individually to make it into the music industry one way or another. They even agreed to back up Tony Sheridan on recordings, didn't they? Of course, John and Paul were learning the ropes as songwriters, hoping to maybe make it into the industry that way. And through playing every dive in England, as well as their stint in Germany, they were very good musicians. Not that your average female fan demanded that, but you know what? I think that's part of why they were so popular with the boys as well. This was something that these boys might learn how to do in the future. I was one. But when they landed, they already had 2 albums out, okay? And within months, they would release their Hard Day's Night film along with the accompanying soundtrack to that film, an album of 13 songs, all written by Lennon and McCartney. That was the first time the Beatles were responsible for every single track on the album as far as songwriting goes. And wow, John Lennon was reigning supreme at this time. 10 of the songs on that album were by John Lennon, 3 by Paul McCartney. And as I've said many times on this channel, those 3 Paul McCartney gems were easily as good as the 3 best Lennon tracks on that album. That album, folks, Hard Day's Night, it is a masterpiece. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, it is the Beatles' first true masterpiece. Now, that doesn't cut down their first 2 albums, and especially when you think of the breakneck speed that they recorded their first album on and the in-between recordings of the second album, you wonder how they could possibly follow up those 2 albums with Hard Day's Night. So there's another factor as to why this was much more than just a cultural happening at the time. You see, the Beatles were cute. They were mop tops. They were witty as hell, charming, entertaining, and they happened to have the 2 greatest songwriters in rock and roll history, nay, in the 20th century. So while other bands were scrambling to get that Mersey beat sound, the Beatles were always progressing out of it. And so many of their contemporaries, over just a matter of months, started to look rather old-fashioned. I mean, most critics would tell you the Hard Day's Night film is considered a masterpiece and that it is one of the best rock and roll films ever made, if not the best. Although written by somebody else, the writer got their personalities down whether the Beatles wanted to admit it or not. Lines from John Lennon sounded pretty much like lines we would hear from John Lennon in the years to come. Paul would remain as cute as he was in this film pretty much throughout the Beatles' career. George would even get better at guitar before the Beatles were through. And it's easy to forget, at the time the Beatles landed, his guitar chops were top notch. But other guitar heroes were coming along, and George, through his study of sitar and probably being sick of Paul taking on a lot of Beatles solos, his original more rockabilly leads started to sound dated. But the Beatles were always pushing forward. Now, that's the exact point of this video. What happened 60 years ago? Well, first of all, a phenomena occurred, didn't it? And this phenomena was much more than the show business happening that it seemed at the time. You know, the Beatles' career and their musical progression showed us a band moving at light speeds while other bands were still trying to land on the moon. All right, so what do you guys think about this? And I want to hear about it in the comments. What was your experience if you were around? What do you think about this phenomena if you weren't? Are you a Gen 2 Beatles fan? A Gen 3, 4, 5? What are we up to? 12 now? But what does that landing mean to you? And you know, you folks in England, let me know how you felt the year before, all right? It was just as big a deal to you in 1963 as it was to us in America in 1964. In fact, it changed my freaking life. I'm a musician primarily because the Beatles were musicians. All right, folks, that's the video for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. That always helps with the algorithm and all that nonsense. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, but you've, kind of been watching it and almost doing it, now would be a good time to just hit that subscribe to the tribe button, tap that top bell icon, always tap that thing, and you'll be notified of all my future videos. All right, I want to hear from you folks. I'm Michael Noland. This is The Bottom Line, or at least as I see it. And together, you and I, in the comments, we become a tribe. No, not just that. We are the tribe.